Okay. We will no doubt have some folks come on and certainly please feel free to chat your questions and we'll unmute folks later in the presentation, but we'll get underway. I'm Bob Noseworthy with the University of New Hampshire's Interoperability Lab, and my colleague here, if we can hear you.
Yes, Jason Sisk. I'm also here with the Interoperability Lab. I work as a technical manager under Bob.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. And your blur feature works, mine doesn't. So forgive the stray kitten in the background if you see a kitten distracting me. Hopefully they don't kill the computer. Let's see if I can get these slides to work. There we go. So again, I think most everyone understands UNH-IOL. I won't dwell on this, but we're very active in many spaces. We're just focusing in these series around single pair Ethernet and related efforts, as well as TSN. Jason and I briefly introduced ourselves. Again, these slides will be available after the fact, as well as the recording. So feel free to reach out to us if you have questions on any areas that we don't get to today. We will try to talk to a brief update on the .3 interim. I'll be honest, I see some folks from the .1 world. I haven't been able to spend a lot of time in January on the .1 space. Hopefully that'll change in Atlanta at the March meeting where we'll be in attendance. We'll go through a few more updates on the various speeds. We'll focus on the SPE topics, but I do have a few timing related updates I want to make sure you all are continuing to be aware of. And then we'll go into that open discussion. Welcome your input. So feel free to queue up your questions. Jason, if you want to take this one away.
Yeah, all right. Thank you, Bob. Thanks for the introduction. As we briefly stated there, the 802.3 January interim followed a couple of the groups in regards to the SPE related technologies. Includes .cy, the 25 gig base T1 working group who is nearing completion. The DG group, which is the 100 megabit, basically T1L upgrade. And then, of course, the enhanced multi-drop task force for the 10 meg T1S type technology. Going back to CY, again, they're kind of moving more towards just finishing the draft 3.0, or they finished the 3.0, comments against it, and they're moving towards the 3.1. So that's very, let's say, nearing the end of finishing and becoming part of the standard. If you're curious on how they're making that as the 25 gig on one single pair Ethernet, definitely keep an eye out and try to follow. I'm sure there's a lot of information in the public area. Continuing to DG, there's a lot of still, let's say, analysis in terms of how we're going to scope this technology. Last time it began with just an insertion loss requirement. So this time they kind of investigated that a little bit further. Is it the right one? Does that help then branch off of the channel into some more of the transmitter and connector types? How are we defining that? So a lot of things in terms of the link segment, different types of AWG cabling, what type of terminal blocks or connectors are they using, and then a little bit of the SNR and how that's defined using all of those requirements. From there, DA is a little bit further along. I guess I could have swapped DG and DA. I guess alphabetical order there. But in terms of presentations, they have a great deal of information on their simulation of the channel, which is quite interesting. And it's becoming more and more complicated as this enhanced multi-drop is including more nodes. So having beyond 8 nodes, having 16 plus nodes or almost up to 75 meters of distance is a large ask. Trying to manipulate and try to understand each factor, whether it be the stub length, the MDI attachment points, and kind of the effects on those in terms of the channel model and what's the minimal required, like transmitter and receiver, in order to adapt to those constraints.
And that is an evolution beyond 10 base T1S, right? I believe the port name thereafter is 10 base T1M in that space. But
I don't know if that's totally clicked, but it's what we're going for at the moment, I guess.
It's not final yet, for sure. For sure. Yep.
So I think
so on that 10 base T1S update, we did have a successful plug fest since I think the last time we spoke. Oh yeah, Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome to 2023, already February. We are proposing having a second Plug Fest the week of June 19th, second for us at least, for 10-base T1S. This will likely have a different focus than this initial one, which was just on channels and noise immunity, some of the PLCA load testing, all related back to some of the improvement areas that Jason was just referring to for DA, something where we can have a little bit more channel work done in the multi-drop space. It's challenging there. We can get into the Q&A part on some of the issues encountered there. We do have some PCS and PLCA capabilities, continuing to expand that, working on some of our own test plans, but also trying to get the time I can with TC14 to align with the Open Alliance's efforts. But we have a already existing 3-decade-old half-duplex MAC test plan that I've enabled for 10-base T1S, and we're performing those services for customers who are asking for that. Naturally, to do that testing, we need to have low-level visibility, so we have full PCS decode and verification from a real-time scope capture of what's happened. We can precisely control when collisions occur and such in a half-duplex environment. This is all with PLCA disabled, right? Which CSMA-CD is the underpinning of PLCA. So if CSMA-CD is not working right, PLCA is not going to work right. And we can even, if we really needed to, decode a frame with our line taps, even if it suffered a collision. Because again, this is a shared medium. This is not split, two different paths, one for transmit, one for receive, like 100-base TX or other older half-duplex technologies that the underlying channel was full duplex, but the MAC operated as half duplex. This is actually, noise that will corrupt your signal. Generally not a need for it, but it's a cute capability. We do have that software capability and working to make that available, but our focus at the moment is capability, not enablement of in-house testing. We can certainly address needs if we get those requests. But we do encourage folks to engage with us directly for 10-base T1S. We have some members now, we invite more, and certainly reach out to us if you have more interests on PLCA testing, areas that we can assist even above the MAC and an SPI type interface into a pluggable module or such. And certainly where your needs might be for 10-base T1S Plugfest. June 19th is not set in stone. But it's far enough out that I think we can start making plans. And if that doesn't work, let's find a time that works in the summer that does work for interested folks in this 10-base T1S space. 10-base T1L, we have been at this for a year and a half, 2 years now, I think, Jason, right? Ethernet advanced physical layer is where we've had a lot of activity and support. The APL groups helped enable these testing services. And from that capability, we've leveraged that for the 10-base T1S capability as well. But there's still a need to finish the silicon conformance. APL groups focused on what their members need to verify that their products are compliant to their expectation. But the assumption is there that the underlying silicon is fully conformant. So while we do have some PCS and PHY control tests that go beyond the APL group, they need to be finished so that we can do full IEEE conformance verification for those bits of silicon, full auto negotiation testing as well, and the MAC testing I referred to. So these things do go beyond the APL specifications. Those are published. You can go look them up and see what the test plans are and what the capabilities are. But things like that MAC testing are an important area. Even on the full duplex 10-base T1L space, and we'll get to that. So APL specifically, we continue to offer that certification service for those groups, but we also support P&O and ODVA and OPC Foundation and FieldCom groups certification efforts for these technologies, enabling them with software and hardware boards, test fixtures to allow for that testing to occur. But we can do that as well if the industry has that interest. Feel free to contact us. We are, as I mentioned, continuing to expand to offer full conformance, as at least the semiconductor vendors would benefit from. And a prelude here, we'll have a little bit more on a later slide, but the Ethernet Alliance is beginning to look at least doing a Plugfest, if not potentially more. And maybe focused on the Poodle SPOE, maybe focused on a broader 10-base T1L application beyond just the process bus, industrial automation spaces, building automation, things of that form where 2NL will also be used. Again, we do have that software available, cute little QR code here for you to grab just to get the link to what that software is, as well as the hardware boards, simulation boards for the loads that are necessary, load simulators, so we can fully load down, say, a 24-port power sourcing piece of equipment, trunks or spurs as APL defines them. And again, we can take questions either through chat or feel free to queue them up so that we have some discussion on anything you're hearing as we go through this. I want to spend some time just to illustrate why we exist. The interoperability lab started because two companies were recognizing they had problems with early FDDI solutions, of all things, and 10-base-T solutions. And they needed a neutral place to come together to find gaps. That still happens today, and it's not just with individual product makers, semiconductor makers. Sometimes it's groups. Here's an example where there are basic functionality, this media access controller or the Ethernet controller that is defined across all speeds of Ethernet, that none of the current groups are really focused on because they're focused on their niche. TSN for Avenue, the physical layer needs for the automotive space for Open, the industrial automation needs for the APL group. And there's that assumption, like I mentioned, for the PHYs for 10-base-T1L, that the semiconductor just works. And similarly, that assumption that the Ethernet controller just works. And after 30 years of Ethernet, you might be reasonably expecting that to be the case. But that's not all. If validation isn't performed, gaps, issues can slip through. And we've identified some recently. In the past year, we've tripped over a couple things. And the salient point here, while I can't go into details in this forum, if those issues line up, usually it takes two to tango. So if there's two issues that a device has, one device has one, the other has the other, you get no packets through. It's not 1% loss, or it's 100% loss. So you'll notice it. So there's that good part. You're never going to deploy that unless, of course, you hit it in the field with your customer. Then you're going to get a phone call. So we can fix that. That's the good thing. We can already test this. We can verify that these devices don't have the problem. They just need to be required, right? So we can do that MAC testing, 10-base-2NS, 10-base-2NL, higher speeds for SPE or classic Ethernet. Not a problem. Been doing it for a while, but we naturally don't see every product. So we're already reaching out to some customers and manufacturers that we know of. But it's just that reminder, don't skip over layer 2. It's an important detail. 100-base-T1 updates. This is mostly focused on test plan updates. So ISO specs have been published based on the work we've done and contributed to the Open Alliance and worked with the TC1 committee to define that for 100-base-T1. We found various reasons to try to make that more clear, improve some language and clarify the requirements, but also some of those requirements just aren't considered in the original test plans. So I put down two examples here. One, very straightforward, there's an option that the test plans didn't consider, which is polarity correction. So a slave can automatically determine the right polarity, so you don't have to flip the pairs when you're doing your cabling, or if there's a cabling mistake, which happens. That's great. It takes time to do that detection. And the PCS tests and PHY control tests are very time sensitive in the sense of how long do we send patterns with local receiver status okay or not okay, and then what do we expect the device to do after these periods of time. But if we don't take into account in the test plans these optional features, they interact and make the testing complicated. And we're trying to get rid of that complication, make the testing faster and simpler. So that's one area that the work is actively working to address in the what will eventually be a published errata, at least by the Open Alliance for that published ISO standard. And then a little simply put here, but specifically the PHY control state machine across all the technologies in 802.3 has complications. There's performance issues that aren't well defined by the way the standard's written. There is the overarching 802.3 standard interpretation expectation that all exit conditions are evaluated instantaneously. All actions inside a state happen atomically and instantly. And that happens across all the state machines instantly. And to a degree, that's possible if you're all just in the same domain, the clock domain, the receive or the transmit, or even in a loop time space, that might be possible. But there are practical limits in some implementations, and the performance isn't needed to be instantaneous for a lot of this. We don't need a state machine to update and have that burden of cost to update in a nanosecond from one state machine to another. But we want the links to come up in 100 milliseconds. At least that's explicitly defined in 100 base T1, and it might not be as explicit in other technologies, but we still need that specification. So, we don't need a nanosecond, but we at least need to come up with a number. So in some of these cases, especially when there's a visible line coding difference, I can see on the wire if it's send I or send N. I can see on the wire if its local receiver status is okay or not okay. If those variables get updated out of sync, it might alter our perception of what is actually occurring internally. So what's the allowance for state machine communication? What's that performance bound? 10G base T later went back and corrected their standard for adding some recommendations, not requirements, but recommendations on performance. No other PHY control state machine from 1000 base T all the way up through multi-gig has done that yet. And there may not be a need universally, but there's, at least because of how the coding works, some sensitivities in 100 base T1. Participate in the Open Alliance group for deeper discussion on that, review of the errata and the publications to come forward. Some big news here.
Yes.
Fantastic news here. We were just talking about 25G base T1 becoming a standard. We have finally, with the partnership of Microchip, been able to announce a fully functional 100% coverage tool for use for PCS and PHY control validation for 1000 base T1. Now that's fantastic. The link for that announcement is here. We will be continuing to exercise that through much of this quarter with the early, not at this point, not terribly early. Those products that exist in the market are generally testing with us to verify their full compliance with this expanded tooling. So that's great. And we'll have some more comments on how this relates to other efforts, multi-G base T1, in an upcoming slide. But the other big news here, at least for some spaces, we've joined the Agricultural Industry Electronics Foundation, or AEF. And the key here, there's a keen interest in this space because we're talking, large farm equipment and other large industrial heavy machinery use cases. They extend up beyond the classic automotive use case. So the type B channel, which you might not have heard of before, but it's 100 base T1, longer distance, I believe it's 40 meters. Correct me, Jason, if my memory's bad.
1000 base T1, but yes, that's 40 meters.
I'm sorry if I said 100. Yeah, 1000 base T1, 40 meters. So their HSI committee, and too many acronyms, but they're working on the high-speed ISOBUS, I believe, for that group. So they're looking at the ramifications of bringing this high-speed technology in, the SPE, but also making use of type B. So I have had some talks with Natalie from the Open Alliance, and we'll be either through her or directly communicating with the board just to make sure that Open Alliance isn't planning to do anything with type B, as we likely work with AEF to define some type B PMA test plans, leveraging those published ISO documents where we can, because we certainly want to encourage coordination across the industry. That's what our role has always been. Again, towards that end, we are looking to have a 1000 base T1 SPE Plugfest. It may very well be focused mostly on this type B problem, but it's been a while since we've had a Plugfest for 100 or 1000, and there's a lot of solutions now. And as I just mentioned, the PCS and PHY control conformance testing is just coming online. So doing some interop testing to really get a sense of what, if any, problems remain, I think is going to be beneficial. Again, will it be type B only or broader? Depends on input from yourselves here on this call and elsewhere in the industry to give us that guidance. And we're happy to work with AEF and or the EA and or the Open Alliance to help host and promote and attract people to participate in that activity. This one, I will speak to the first point, but maybe you can have a few words, Jason, on the second one. I mentioned the microchip tool for 1000 base T1. I'm very pleased to announce that we expect to be commencing work finally. It's a year after I wanted to, with OEMs and semiconductor vendors. There's at least 5 parties who have either I've talked to or have reached out to me with potential partial solutions for PCS and PHY control validation for multi-G base T1. and trying to coordinate that into something where we have approved test plans through the Open Alliance TC15 effort, as well as tooling that actually can perform the tests, is what we need to execute on this calendar year, if at all possible, as products are beginning to go into designs that are meant for future production years. So, obviously we want to do as much compliance testing as we can before those parts are finalized. And to that end, we need to expand our additional services in the space, and the PMA piece Jason has been spending a good part of the past year on as well.
Yeah. No, so we definitely have the PMA test capability, and we've been working on developing our own in-house solution. So be interested to hear and work more with vendors as they come online with that. Especially having the full suite of PCS5 PMA. It's going to be a large benefit for not only the industry, but everyone around as they get higher and higher speeds with 25 gig. And then speaking off of that, on the SEC point, we come to announce more of our partnership with getting more of those channels defined, understanding how each of those hopefully can better be reflected as what's seen in industry, from even the smallest speeds of 10-base T1S up to the multi-gig, as we're talking about now. So understanding those UTP, or unshielded twisted pair and shielded twisted pair channels of all the flavors of SPE is important in order to map out and test the short limits and then the maximum limits set by the standard, in order to make sure that everything works in the environment, from PHY to PHY and ECU to ECU is key. So hopefully that will help branch out all the different types that we've seen and better be able to debug issues that we work with on our customers and industry. Maybe even talk more about channels as a whole, but that's a large task.
we had some fun with the 10-base T1S channels. That's for sure. We definitely got some channels that well, just proved physics all over again. Yes, if you put too many nodes on the link, it just can't work. Too much capacitance. But towards that end, plugfests are useful. The compliance tools are fantastic. Test plans are fantastic. Sometimes it's very beneficial just to bring people together early. Obviously, even at these multi-G-base T speeds, vendors come together on their own, or they work with other partners in the industry. There has already been a multi-G-base T1 SPE plugfest recently. We're certainly looking to continue to expand on those service offerings and potentially get early tooling access for PCS and related tests for a multi-G-base T1 plugfest this year, if there's enough interest. I think there will be. So certainly reach out to us if you have interests and designs on what we might be able to address to augment what's currently been done. A lot of work in the PMA space. That's all great. We need to start looking at, I think, some higher layers as well. So this is perhaps news for this group, but we've had MaxSec testing for over a decade, 15 years or so at least. MaxSec in the automotive space, at least, has risen in significance in recent years. And we've certainly made note of that uptick in asks, but we haven't had a concerted push from more than one vendor of every 6 months or so. It's finally starting to see that increase. So I'm just again reminding that we have that MaxSec capability, and we have recently dusted off that 15-year-old tool, taken a look at it, given it some updates, and at least can perform that older MaxSec testing. Now, it is older, and the tools and test plans that we offer do need to be updated to the 2018 AE specifications, but that effort obviously is a little bit lighter once we've already dusted off the past work and continue forward from there. So MaxSec, again, a little bit sensitive to the speeds and the test platforms that we can run on, but in these spaces, it's just media converting and or adaption. We don't need to necessarily have high performance links. We just need devices that can actually communicate properly to .1x and .1AE properly and verify the protocols. So this is standards compliance to the IEEE specifications. We're not doing code review type security, nothing of that nature. This is just MaxSec layer 2 link validation. But let us know what your needs are. Let us know if there's a particular focus area that you think would be most beneficial now, sooner than later. And for the clarity and awareness, Open Alliance has recently, I think it was late October last year, started their TC17 group. which is focused on MaxSec for T1S multi-drop environments. Given that Ethernet MaxSec has traditionally been full duplex point-to-point, there's obviously some challenges there, as well as no doubt some specific needs of the automotive space. But automotive alone does not need a MaxSec. It's a data center and industrial use cases, and no doubt many others. So if there's cases that you believe would be served with some of the services that we have or can extend, please feel free to let us know. And to that end, for some number of years, we've been offering TC8 or TC11 from Open Alliance in partial forms. So we continue to get requests from folks asking for ECU testing, which in some layers, it's just physical layer testing designed for an ECU instead of a semiconductor eval board. We can do that. We can do some of the layer 2 testing defined by TC8. We can do some of the layer 3 testing defined, I'll get my words right, by TC8. But for full coverage, there's something like some IP and some other tests of ARP, things of that form that we haven't invested to develop our own solution for, but we do have partners who we have access to their solutions for and can perform that full TC8 or TC11 testing if your use case needs that full coverage. Similarly, while we offer Avenue full automotive certification, most of our customers come to us and just ask for a subset of that testing. So we're certainly responsive to what our customers want, but if you need the full service, just let us know and we can run that through for you. Our PTP Valet tool is expected to officially be available here this year, this quarter expected. And that's mostly for the IEEE SA certification for 1588. But again, that particular 1588 use case extends in similar ways to ITU telecom use cases, the full AS 2020 use cases, and so on. So certainly happy to have those discussions of where our capabilities can be expanded to meet your need. And maybe you can speak to this one on the Ethernet Alliance, Jason.
Yeah. So obviously the Ethernet Alliance covers more broad spectrum here, from all of the high-speed networking down to now including SPE and potentially the SPOE efforts. As we briefly mentioned before, plugfests are kind of back on the rise a little bit. And obviously each year, I think Ethernet Alliance has done the high-speed networking one. So if you aren't aware of that and be interested, that's happening the first half of May. And that's 50 and 100 gigabits per lane, SFP, QSFP, QSFP-DD type data center technologies, high-speed Ethernet. But going further, there is somewhat of a call for interest in terms of SPE plugfests. Definitely reach out to the EA if you're interested, and the coverage of it might expand to the T1L industrial efforts that Bob had mentioned earlier, UDL and SPOE as they become to start emerge into the market. And then it could expand further into the higher SPE speeds as they were not as adequately given a chance to have a plugfest due to some of the events in the recent years. So if you have questions or concerns or would like to be involved, definitely reach out to the EA, and I believe the next meeting is the February 13th. So.
And just as a reminder, the EA for several years has partnered with us to offer their power over Ethernet certification. So going from 4-pair cabling PoE certification to single-pair Ethernet power certification is certainly a natural evolution, but it doesn't need to be limited to power. There's various interests that may very well look at APL-like certification, but in a broader use case. So certainly feel free to engage with those groups. We're certainly happy to take your questions and try to steer you or work with you to meet your needs as well.
It'll be interesting as there's a lot of port types. So
oh yeah, always. Same with like MaxSec problems and such. So this is part of the T in TSN update and where my attention's been recently. We're working with the Department of Homeland Security, funded by them, for supporting the development of a test plan for this emerging standard P1952. If you haven't heard of it, it is resilient PNT, or position, navigation, and timing for user equipment. So we're not testing satellites. We're testing the thing that might receive a GPS or any other GNSS signal, but it's not restricted to just a GNSS solution, right? It could be terrestrial radio or any other form. But how do we build a resilient system that is, not necessarily immune to, but can recover well and tolerant to resist in some level spoofing, jamming, things of that form. And then validate that the user equipment performs to that expectation. So the standard itself is still in draft, early draft. Perhaps by June, we will have the first draft. But in parallel to that effort, we're working with DHS, the P1952 committee, and IEEE-SA's ICAP program to stand up a committee of experts, of a group where parties can come together, share input to the test plan, contribute, and through normal processes, arrive at a test plan that can verify to these requirements. So feel free to get involved there. Obviously, there's a timing component here, and it's the initial focus of both the standard and the testing as well. But there's the P and the N part that we won't be ignoring. And just a quick reminder, there are telecom use cases for these technologies, timing especially. Our own ITU-T 8275.1 and .2 test plans are certainly available in draft form. Those continue to be of interest to expand for full coverage of those ITU specifications. And within the O-RAN Alliance, there are plenty of performance-oriented tests defined by the various working groups. And as host for the North American Spring Plug Fest, which we expect to be, hasn't been officially decided, so may be subject to change. But we've partnered with AT&T in the past. We co-hosted with Cable Labs last fall. We already have support from all those organizations to be the host for this spring, and just a coordinator role. There's still multiple parties. Cable Labs will still have activity. University of Utah's Powder and Rutgers and others will have some activity. But in the space of 5G and any aspect, whether it's TSN or just timing related, there's certainly potential to partner. Bring your partners to us. We can host and showcase and let, be it the telecom providers or others, see that your solutions are actually working and, dare I say, even interoperable, right? But at least build towards a program, whether it's eventually supported by the US CHIPS Act or some other solution where there's actually certification of these O-RAN open source, well-specified interfaces to make an interoperable 5G solution, be it for industrial or telecom purposes, as you define those industries. So that's all we wanted to cover. I just have a few old reminders in here, but still worth reminding folks. We continue to be working on a Center for Digital Factory Innovation, looking for partners in the industry, big or small, who might want to pool their resources and do some shared common development, be it with ourselves or Georgia Tech, or other partner universities in that effort. So feel free to reach out to us on how you can get more information on this Industry University Collaborative Research Center, or IUCRC, for the Center for Digital Factory Innovation. And hopefully, after our Atlanta plenary for the IEEE, I'll have much more meaningful TSN updates for various spaces, including the industrial TSN profile 6802, among others. Automotive, aerospace, etc. But let's take some questions if there are, and we can certainly unmute mics if you'd rather just speak than type. So I think you're all being given the ability to unmute yourselves if you so wish, and we can have a discussion, or certainly just a Q&A. As you wish. If you'd prefer to ask a question anonymously, you can certainly type that, and we'll address that correspondingly. I do see some familiar names on the call, so thank you again for bearing with us this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. I'll refrain from calling you out specifically, but certainly like to see some of you. And please don't be shy if you want to grab the mic or type out a question. Otherwise, I can always fill some time. I just want to make sure we're addressing interests for the group we have here. And I have a cat behind me.
I see something semi-interesting, Bob, that I don't think I noticed before about the MaxSec. That'll have to work with things like PTP and TSN?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. So why, right? So the short answer for that, if there's variable latency through the encryption or decryption path, then you have a variable path delay. And if you have a variable path delay with unknowns, the unknown unknowns you can't correct for, that just adds error to your timing recovery. There are solutions for that, but it's something that needs to be mindful of. Any asymmetries in the path also need to be known. So if you have a higher latency on decryption than on transmission, if you're only encrypting, why you would only encrypt in one direction, I don't know, but there's certainly various challenges.
Take into account for, yeah, okay.
I see one person I'm going to call out, and I apologize in advance for this if I didn't give you any heads up, because I wasn't honestly expecting to see you here, Mr. Gunther. But it's always a pleasure to have a discussion with you. I'm just curious if there's anything on the TSN side that you're active with that you feel you are able to share, because again, unfortunately, I wasn't able to participate much in January.
Always nice to be called out. Thanks, Bob. No, I'm happy to see you're still following with AS 2020, getting that going, and certainly with Q, major new release of that coming out. So I'm not quite sure what in that would require certification, but I'm just kind of curious, watching what's going on the automotive side of the world with the single pair Ethernet and what you're doing there. So that was my main purpose in attending today. Yeah, no, always happy to have you. And if you don't mind, for the folks who don't recognize why I called you out, your role in IEEE 802 these days. So I am the TSN vice chair. Basically, if Janos, our chair, gets too busy with things, or when we have our plenary meetings and interims and we've got multiple sessions going on, I help chair those sessions. And I was for quite a while the editor for the automotive profile 802.1DG. Have since had to give that up, and Max Turner, if you're an automotive person, you definitely recognize that name, is now the editor for that. So been doing this for too long. 2006, I think, is when I began. And with Bob, we certified, when I was working with Harman, the first ABB endpoint. So it was very fun working with the group. Definitely give them a thumbs up for ease of working with, and their helpfulness is fantastic. And I do want to give you a nod, because I really appreciate and still remember to this day the extra time you've taken. Most notably, one of your visits, you were kind enough to give many of our students a talk on test-driven development from your many years of experience. And that's what we're here for, right? We're preparing students for the industry, but we're also learning best practices, sharing knowledge. And for those here, not that I'm gonna pick on Craig, Mr. Craig Gunther, too much more. We have the TSN vice chair here for any comments that we might be able to collectively answer, since unfortunately I did miss too much of January. That's the problem with having virtual hybrid meetings. You try to attend. That's probably also a problem with having them free. So, but we live in the world that we live in. So I know some of the names, and I know some of the folks here. I hope we've touched on some of the topics, the APL topics, the industrial T1L use cases, and maybe some of the T1S connections. Certainly feel free to type out a question if you're more comfortable with that. I hope to see more of our TSN services connect together, be it through the Open Alliance Avenue or other venues. I still have some sponsored work where we are working with some parties on addressing their TSN needs, and I hope that will someday be something public that I can share. But for now, I guess the only other significant update I want to make sure I mention, because we forgot to put it in our slides, we are in the pipeline getting TISAX certified. That's TISAX. Don't challenge me on the full acronym, but it is a European security standard, ensuring that we're meeting the expectations of the. In this case, it's typically for the automotive OEMs in those spaces, but always good to make sure our cybersecurity and other standards are up to industry expectations, so that we can work with our partners no matter where they are. So that's certainly something I'm happy to see moving forward. We expect to have that fully audited and approved this calendar year, so that we can just continue to expand what we do with OEMs and ECU vendors and anyone else who has similar requirements. But yeah, Well, as always, I don't want to hold folks unnecessarily. If there's any other lingering questions or topics that you think we can expand on, feel free to drop a question or share a chat. There is the upcoming Atlanta Plenary. There's always plenty of activity. And I see one of our attendees that I did want to make a mention to, but I'm not sure if his audio is working. So we'll wait a second for that. But there's also a whole range of tools that I just can't spend the time addressing all of them. But I do want to give a mention again that we had several tools participate in the T1S Plugfest, and I'm thankful for that. Looking certainly towards a point where we can perhaps get the agreement of all the parties to publish something a little bit more publicly than just the documents that we shared with the attendees. All those did go out last month, for those who may not be aware. So certainly feel free to contact us if you have any questions about that. And I see the party I was referring to just joined back. I just want to repeat an earlier comment that, again, I'm thankful that we have a TISAX audit in the pipeline. So hopefully going to have that TISAX certification approval in this calendar year. So again, any questions or comments, chat or otherwise? Otherwise, I'm not going to hold folks here for extra time. But we have an interesting gang of folks. I'm happy to give you back 15 minutes, but I also think we could have an interesting discussion if there's a problem that you think we are capable of addressing but aren't addressing, whether it's this MAC testing coverage. This is a problem. We're going to be talking to some manufacturers, trying to encourage them to, you should, full duplex Ethernet MACs. They don't do nothing. They don't do a lot. They're not as complicated as some technologies, but if they have a fault, it can ruin your day. So we have that capability. Let's make sure folks exercise that if they have that need. Test plans, even our own test plans, can be improved. Let's improve them where we identify faults. Let's, in further efforts, we're expanding our RESTful automation interfaces. We've done it for Avenue. We've done it for APL. We want to continue to define, if you come to us with this RESTful interface exposed, we can automate the testing of your device. Go to this test mode, go to this feature. So our technicians don't have to take the time to learn your particular interface, and our tools can do the testing faster, and our in-house tools could do the testing faster for you. So any area of improvement that you think we could leverage, always feel free to share. MaxSec just being the most recent renewed effort. Again, it's 15 plus years old from our perspective. Again, I welcome a last call for questions, but otherwise I think we're done for today. Really appreciate your attendance. Look forward to catching up with some of you in person in Atlanta. And if not in Atlanta, always feel free to reach out to us. Our contact info is on the screen. Happy to take your questions in a more private forum where we can be more interactive as you wish. So welcome to 2023. We'll talk again probably in April.
Yep.
Right. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you.